When I walked into the courtroom that morning, my daughter Sarah rolled her eyes and whispered something condescending to her husband Daniel. But then something extraordinary happened. The judge looked up, froze completely, and murmured with disbelief, "Is that her?" The entire courtroom fell silent. None of them had any idea who I really was until that moment. That trial changed everything. My name is Helen. I'm 69 years old, and until a few months ago, I was just a typical grandmother. Every morning I'd wake up at 6, make my coffee in the same chipped mug I'd used for 20 years, and look out my small kitchen window while I watered the violets my late husband loved so much. It was a simple, predictable life full of small rituals that gave me peace. For 45 years, I was the mother who sacrificed everything for her only daughter, Sarah. I worked cleaning offices at night, sold baked goods on weekends, and sewed clothes to earn a few extra dollars. Also, she could go to college and have the life I never did. When she married Daniel, an arrogant man who never spoke a kind word to me, I swallowed my pride and welcomed them into my home every Sunday with a full table and my best smile. I thought that after I was widowed, Sarah and I would grow closer. How naive I was. Instead of finding comfort in our shared company, my daughter began to see me as a burden. Her visits became cold and obligatory, her calls less frequent, and her excuses for not spending time with me more creative. The greatest humiliation of my life came on a gray Thursday in October. I had made the pot roast Sarah loved so much, the one that took me hours to prepare, but always made her smile when she was a child. I set out my best tablecloth, the embroidered one I'd made when she was a teenager, and even bought fresh flowers for the centerpiece. When they arrived, Daniel walked into my house as if he owned it. He plopped down on my late husband's armchair and turned on the TV without even saying hello. Sarah was wearing a green dress I had bought for her, but her expression was as cold as January ice. "Mom, we need to talk," she said in that voice she'd developed since she got married, a voice that sounded like it belonged to a stranger. She sat on the edge of her chair as if she were in a hurry to leave. "Daniel and I have made a decision," she continued, while he grunted from the armchair without taking his eyes off the screen. "This house is too big for you. You can't maintain it alone anymore, and we need a bigger place for when we have children. We found a perfect assisted living facility for people your age." I felt the floor open up beneath my feet. This was the house where Sarah took her first steps, where we celebrated every birthday, where her father had died holding my hand. Every corner held our most sacred memories. Every photograph on the walls told our story. "But Sarah, this is our home. Our memories are here," I pleaded, my voice trembling, feeling each word break. "Memories are in the heart, Mom, not in the walls," she replied with a coldness that chilled my blood. "Besides, the facility has activities for people like you. You'll be better off there. You'll have company your own age." Daniel smirked with satisfaction as he started sizing up the rooms with his eyes as if he were already the owner. "It's for the best, Mrs. Helen," he added with that fake smile I hated so much. "We'll take care of all the paperwork. You don't have to worry about a thing." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. My own daughter, the girl for whom I had sacrificed my youth, my health, and my dreams, was kicking me out of my own house to hand my home over to that despicable man. Tears threatened to fall, but I swallowed them. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "I need time to think about it," I murmured with what little dignity I had left. "There's not much to think about, Mom," Sarah replied, standing up. "It's already decided. They're coming to appraise the house next week." And just like that, they left. They left my pot roast untouched, my flowers wilting, and my heart shattered on the table where we were once a happy family. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen looking at the photographs hanging on the wall. Sarah as a baby. Sarah on her first day of school. Sarah on her graduation day. In every picture, I was there holding her, hugging her, smiling with pride. How had it come to this? How could the little girl who once told me I was her hero now treat me like trash? The next few days were a nightmare. Daniel arrived with an appraiser without telling me, a man in a gray suit who walked through my house as if it were an item for sale. He took notes, measured rooms, and talked about potential and necessary renovations as if I wasn't there. Sarah accompanied him, nodding at every disparaging comment about my home. "The pipes are old," the appraiser said, "and these kitchen tiles are outdated. Everything would have to be replaced." My husband had laid those tiles with his own hands when Sarah was 10. Each one represented hours of work, love, and hope for our future. But to them, they were just obstacles to their new life. The humiliation hit its lowest point when Sarah brought brochures from the facility. "Look, Mom, it has beautiful gardens and they organize bingo on Tuesdays," she told me with that fake voice she used when she wanted to convince me of something. "Plus, there's a nurse on call 24/7, you'll be safer." Safer. I had lived in this house for 30 years without any problems. I knew all my neighbors. I had my routines, my plants, my memories. But to Sarah, none of that mattered. All that mattered was that I get out of her way. One day when I least expected it, they arrived with papers. Daniel walked in like he owned the place, followed by Sarah and a man who introduced himself as a lawyer. "Mrs. Helen, we've prepared all the documents for the property transfer. We just need your signature." "Transfer?" I asked, confused. "I thought you were going to sell the house." Sarah avoided my gaze. "Well, Daniel and I decided to keep it. It's better for the family to keep the properties." That's when I understood everything. It wasn't just that they wanted me out. They wanted to take my house, the legacy my husband and I had built with so much effort. It was theft disguised as filial concern. "I'm not signing anything," I said with the firmest voice I could muster. Daniel stood up abruptly. His face changed completely, showing the aggression he had always kept hidden while my husband was alive. "Ma'am, you're no longer in a condition to make decisions. Sarah is your sole heir and is acting in your best interest." "This is my house," I yelled, surprising myself with my own strength. "And I'm not leaving." "Mom, don't make this harder," Sarah mumbled, finally showing some discomfort. "You know you can't keep living alone. Last week you forgot to turn off the gas." It was a lie. I had never forgotten to turn off the gas. But Daniel smiled, as if he had just found the perfect excuse. "See, Sarah, your mother isn't well anymore. It's dangerous to leave her alone." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you don't sign voluntarily, we could explore other legal options. A competency hearing, for example." I felt my world collapse. My own daughter was willing to declare me mentally incompetent to steal my house. The man I had welcomed into my family as a son-in-law was threatening me in my own living room, and I, a 69-year-old woman, was completely alone against them. "I need time," I murmured, defeated. "You have 1 week," Daniel said coldly. "After that, we'll do what we have to do." When they left, I collapsed onto my husband's armchair, and I cried like I hadn't cried since his funeral. I cried for the daughter I had lost, for the home they were taking from me, for the life that was crumbling around me. I felt betrayed, humiliated, completely helpless. That night, for the first time in my life, I considered giving up. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was too old, too weak, too useless to fight. Maybe it was best to accept my fate and disappear quietly just as they wanted. But then something inside me refused to die. A small flame of dignity that still burned in my chest. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me, not after a lifetime of sacrifice and devotion. The next day, Sarah returned alone. For a moment, my heart filled with hope. Maybe she had come to her senses. Maybe she had come to apologize. How wrong I was. "Mom, I came to help you pack," she said in that robotic voice she had adopted. "I brought boxes. We can start with your clothes." I stared at her, searching for any trace of the girl I had raised. But I only found a cold, calculating stranger. "Sarah, please reconsider. I'm your mother." "That's exactly why I'm doing this," she replied, not looking me in the eye. "Because I love you, and I want what's best for you." Love. This was love. Stripping me of my home, my dignity, everything I had left. That was love. For the next few hours, Sarah began to pack my belongings as if they were worthless objects. She took my family photographs and threw them into boxes carelessly. She packed the books my husband had given me, the dishes from my wedding china, the tablecloths I had embroidered during years of insomnia. "This dress is very old, Mom. I don't think you'll need it," she said, holding my mourning dress, the one I had worn to my husband's funeral. "Leave it," I begged her. "Please leave it." But she had already put it in a donation bag. My pain didn't matter. My feelings didn't matter. I didn't matter. The last straw was when she found my jewelry box. Inside was my wedding ring, the earrings my husband gave me on our 20th anniversary, and a small gold chain that had belonged to my mother. "This jewelry will be safer in a safe deposit box," Sarah said, putting it in her personal bag. "At the facility, it could get lost or stolen." "Those are mine," I shouted, trying to snatch the bag from her. "Mom, you're very agitated. This just confirms you can't take care of yourself," she replied with a sickening calm that made my blood run cold. In that moment, I knew I had lost my daughter forever. The Sarah I knew was dead, and in her place was this heartless woman manipulated by Daniel and blinded by greed. That night, after Sarah left with my jewelry and my most precious memories, I was left alone in my half-empty house. The bare walls reminded me of how little I had left, how easy it had been for them to dismantle a lifetime. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my living room surrounded by open boxes and scattered memories, and wondered how I had gotten here, at what point I had become invisible when I had stopped mattering. The following days were hell. Daniel would arrive early every morning to supervise the process, as if I were incapable of packing my own things. He brought strangers who measured, photographed, and evaluated every corner of my house. They talked about me as if I weren't present, as if I were an old piece of furniture that needed to be removed. "The lady will have to speed up the process," Daniel told Sarah. "The movers are coming on Monday." It was Friday. I had 3 days left in the home where I had lived for 30 years, where I had raised my daughter, where I had loved and been loved. "And what if I don't finish packing?" I asked in a whisper. "Don't worry, Mom," Sarah replied, without looking up from her phone. "The movers will take care of everything. You just bring the essentials." The essentials. As if a whole life could be reduced to the essentials. That afternoon when they left, I walked through my house like a ghost. I touched the walls my husband had painted. I sat in every chair where we had eaten breakfast as a family. I opened every drawer that held little treasures from my past life. In my husband's desk drawer, I found old letters, paid bills, and some documents I had never looked at. Most of it was unimportant, but there was one folder I had never seen. It was marked with my husband's initials and had a small lock. Curious and desperate to find something, anything that connected me to better times, I looked for the key in all his usual spots. I finally found it inside an old book marking a page about investments and properties. When I opened the folder, my world changed forever. There were documents I didn't fully understand, but one caught my attention immediately. It was a will dated just 6 months before my husband's death that I had never seen before. My hands trembled as I read. My husband had been much more farsighted than I imagined, and Sarah, my dear Sarah, had no idea what she was about to discover. With trembling hands, I began to read the will that would change my life forever. My husband, who had always been so private about money, had been much busier than I imagined during his last years. The document revealed that my dear husband wasn't just the modest employee I thought he was. For decades, he had been quietly investing every extra dollar he earned. He had bought small properties when prices were low. He had invested in stocks of companies that were now worth fortunes. And he had accumulated a wealth I had never imagined in my wildest dreams. But that wasn't all. The will clearly specified that I was the sole heir to everything. Sarah would only receive a small sum if I died, and only if she had cared for me with love and respect during my final years. My husband had been wiser than I thought. He had seen something in Daniel that I had refused to recognize. There was also a clause that left me breathless. My husband owned the entire building where Sarah and Daniel lived. The apartment they thought they were paying for monthly was actually ours. All the tenants in the building were paying rent to us, and that rent had been automatically deposited into an account I knew nothing about. With trembling fingers, I searched through the papers until I found the bank statements. The figure was astronomical. For 2 years since my husband's death, I had been living like a poor widow while a fortune was accumulating in the bank. There were more surprises. My husband owned shares in the company where Daniel worked. Not just minor shares, but a stake so significant that I could practically influence company decisions. There were also investments in restaurants, small businesses, and even a large plot of land on the outskirts of the city that was now worth millions. I read and reread every document, every contract, every certificate. It was all there, perfectly organized and legal. My husband had built a silent empire, and I was its empress without knowing it. But what struck me most was a personal letter I found at the end of the folder. It was in my husband's handwriting, addressed to me. "My dearest Helen," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you, and you have found this treasure I saved for you. Forgive me for not telling you while I was alive, but I wanted it to be a surprise for your golden years. You always worked so hard, you always sacrificed so much for Sarah and for me, that I wanted to make sure you would never want for anything." Tears began to roll down my cheeks as I continued reading. I must also confess something. I never fully trusted Daniel. There is something about him that I don't like, an ambition that worries me. That's why I structured everything this way. If Sarah takes care of you and respects you as you deserve, she will have a comfortable life. But if she ever treats you poorly or tries to take advantage of you, you have all the power to protect yourself. My husband had foreseen exactly what was happening. He had seen through Daniel from the beginning and had prepared my defense before he died. Use this power wisely, my love. Not to hurt, but to protect yourself and to teach. Sarah is good at heart. She is just confused. But if you need to defend yourself, you now have the tools to do so. Signed, your husband who loves you for all eternity. I sat there on my living room floor, surrounded by documents worth millions, crying for the wise man I had lost and for the daughter I was about to lose. But for the first time in months, they were not tears of defeat. They were tears of gratitude, of hope, and yes, of a quiet satisfaction. Sarah and Daniel thought they were stripping me of everything. They had no idea that I owned the building where they lived, the shares in the company where he worked, properties all over the city. They thought they were kicking me out of my house to take it for themselves, not knowing that this house was the least valuable of everything I owned. I didn't sleep that night. But for the first time in weeks, it wasn't because of sadness. It was because my mind was working, planning, calculating. My husband had given me more than money. He had given me power, and now I had to decide how to use it. Monday morning arrived with a light rain tapping against the windows. Sarah and Daniel arrived early with the movers, expecting to find me packed and ready to go. Instead, they found me sitting peacefully in my favorite chair, sipping tea as if it were any other day. "Mom, what are you doing?" "The movers are here," Sarah said with that impatience she had developed. "I'm not leaving anymore," I replied with a calm that surprised even me. Daniel approached with that threatening smile I knew so well. "Mrs. Helen, we've already discussed this. You don't have a choice." I looked him directly in the eyes for the first time in years. "You're right, Daniel. I don't have a choice. But it turns out neither do you." Something in my tone must have alerted them, because Sarah approached with a worried expression. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "I'm talking about the fact that I just discovered something very interesting about my financial situation," I said, taking another sip of tea. "But don't worry, you'll understand everything soon enough." Daniel and Sarah looked at me with the expression they reserved for when they thought I was talking nonsense. But I was no longer the same scared woman from the week before. I had a plan, and more importantly, I had the power to execute it. "Mom, enough with the games," Sarah said with irritation. "The movers are waiting, and they have other jobs after this." "Then let them go," I replied calmly, "because they're not moving anything here." Daniel stood up abruptly. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand the situation. You no longer have a choice in this matter." "On the contrary, Daniel, I think it's you two who don't understand the situation." I rose slowly from my chair and walked to the desk where I had left some of the documents I had found. Not all of them, just the ones I needed for this conversation. "Did you know that the apartment you've been living in for 3 years, you've never been paying the real owner?" Sarah frowned. What are you talking about? We pay our rent religiously every month. Yes, but you pay a management company which in turn deposits the money to me because I own the entire building. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel was the first to react with a nervous laugh. That's impossible. You live on a miserable pension. I lived on a pension because I chose to, I replied, savoring every second of their confusion. My husband was much smarter than any of us imagined. I showed him one of the property deeds. Sarah took it with trembling hands and read it once, twice, 3 times. This can't be real, she murmured. It's as real as the fact that you were kicking me out of my own house to take it for yourselves. But it turns out this house is the least valuable thing I own. Daniel snatched the document from Sarah's hands. His face turned pale as he read. This has to be a fake, a forged document. You can verify it whenever you like, I said with a smile I hadn't felt in months. In fact, I encourage you to. Sarah sank onto the sofa as if her legs had given out. Why did you never tell us? Because even I didn't know until 3 days ago. Your father kept this secret to protect me. How visionary of him. Daniel started pacing the living room, clearly agitated. This changes everything, Sarah. If your mother really owns the building, it means that I can evict you whenever I want. I completed the sentence for him. Along with all the other tenants who have been paying me promptly for 2 years. You can't do that, Sarah said, her voice breaking. We're family. Family. The word came out of my mouth with more bitterness than I intended. Like when you were ready to declare me mentally incompetent to steal my house? Like when you packed up my memories like they were trash? Like when you took my mother's jewelry? Sarah started to cry, but these weren't the manipulative tears she had learned to use. They were tears of genuine terror. Mom, please, we can fix this. It was all Daniel's idea. Sarah, Daniel yelled, furious that she was blaming him. It's true, she continued, ignoring him. He convinced me it was for the best. He said you were losing your memory, that you couldn't take care of yourself. And you believed him? I asked, feeling my heart break all over again. Do you know your own mother so little that you believed him over your own intuition? The movers who had been waiting at the entrance approached, confused. Excuse me, are we taking the stuff or not? Because we have another job in an hour. No, I replied firmly. Nothing is being moved here. You can leave. Daniel approached me with that aggression he had always kept hidden. This isn't over, you old woman. We're going to challenge these documents. We're going to prove they're fake. Go ahead, I said, unfazed. In the meantime, I hope you have enough money saved to find another place to live, because on the 1st of next month, you'll be receiving an eviction notice. You can't do this to us, Daniel shouted, completely losing his composure. I can and I will. But don't worry, I'll be fair. I'll give you the 30 days required by law. Sarah shot up from the sofa. Mom, please, you have to understand. Daniel told me that if I didn't convince you to move, he would leave me. He said he couldn't stand living knowing you were here alone, being a danger to yourself. And that justifies everything you did to me? I asked. It justifies treating me like trash, packing up my memories without a care, taking your grandmother's jewelry. I'll give them back to you right now, Sarah said, desperately searching her purse. It's too late for that, Sarah. Daniel approached again, but this time his attitude was different. It was no longer threatening, but almost pleading. Mrs. Helen, we can reach an agreement. Sarah is pregnant. Are you really going to throw your own grandchild out on the street? I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Sarah was pregnant and she hadn't told me. I was going to be a grandmother, and I was finding out as a blackmail tactic. Is it true? I asked Sarah. She nodded through her tears. I wanted to tell you in a different way. I wanted it to be a special surprise. Like the surprise of kicking me out of my house, I replied, though I felt my resolve beginning to waver. But then I remembered my husband's words in his letter. Not to hurt, but to protect yourself and to teach. Sarah needed to learn, and her son or daughter deserved to grow up with different values than the ones Daniel was teaching. The news of the pregnancy disarmed me for a moment, but then I remembered all the pain they had caused me. A baby didn't erase the humiliation, the disrespect, or the months of suffering they had put me through. Congratulations on the baby, Sarah, I said, with a calm that was hard to maintain. But that doesn't change what you did to me. Mom, please, Sarah begged. Think of your grandchild. Do you really want them to grow up without knowing their grandmother? Their grandmother was here the whole time, I replied. You were the ones who decided to get rid of me. Daniel tried one last manipulation. Mrs. Helen, if you really have as much money as you say, why don't you help us instead of punishing us? We could be a united family. I looked at him with the contempt he deserved. A united family, like when you threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent, like when you turned my own daughter against me. I never— Shut up, Daniel. I interrupted him with an authority I didn't know I possessed. I've heard enough of your lies. The movers had left, leaving us alone in the tension that filled the house. Sarah was crying silently. Daniel was pacing like a caged animal, and I felt strangely calm for the first time in months. Here's what's going to happen, I announced. You have 30 days to find another place to live. During that time, I don't want to see you here unless it's a real emergency. And after that, Sarah asked, her voice broken, after that, we'll see if you've learned anything about respect and family. Daniel exploded. This is emotional blackmail. You're using your money to manipulate us. Manipulation. The word made me laugh bitterly. Like when you used my supposed mental incompetence to manipulate me. Like when you used my motherly love to blackmail me. It's different, Daniel muttered, but he no longer sounded convincing even to himself. You're right, I admitted. It is different, because I actually have the power I'm using. Sarah rose from the sofa with slow movements. Is there anything we can do to make you change your mind? Yes, I replied without hesitation. But I don't think Daniel is willing to do it. What is it? She asked, clinging to that hope. I want an apology, a real sincere apology for every humiliation you put me through. I want you to admit that you treated me like trash, and I want Daniel to acknowledge that this was all his idea. Daniel turned red with rage. I will never humiliate myself before you. Then get ready to move, I said simply. Sarah looked at him pleadingly. Daniel, please, she's my mother. She's your mother-in-law. We can swallow our pride for our child. No, he shouted. I will not kneel before this manipulative old woman. The insult hung in the air like a slap. Sarah gasped, finally seeing her husband without the lens of blind love. Manipulative old woman, I repeated softly. Interesting. That's what you really think of me. Daniel, no, Sarah murmured, but he had already lost control. Yes, that's what I think. A bitter old woman who can't stand to see her daughter happy. That's why she invented this whole story about the money. Invented? I walked to the desk and pulled out more documents. Did I also invent these bank statements? Invent these property deeds? Invent these stock certificates? I placed each document on the dining room table one by one until the surface was covered with irrefutable proof of my fortune. Sarah approached and began to look at the papers with trembling hands. Oh my God, Mom, this is real. Everything is real. Very real, I confirmed. And now you understand why your husband is so desperate to discredit me. Daniel tried one last tactic. Sarah, can you believe your mother hid all this for years? She's a liar. No, Sarah suddenly shouted, surprising us all. Enough, Daniel, just stop. She turned to me with tears streaming down her cheeks. Mom, forgive me. Forgive me for everything. You're right. I treated you like trash. I took away your memories, your jewelry, your dignity. And the worst part is, I did it because he convinced me you were a burden. Sarah, don't listen to her. Daniel tried, but she completely ignored him. He filled my head with lies about your mental health, about the dangers of you living alone. He made me feel guilty for leaving you here when all you wanted was to be in your own home. Sarah, shut up, Daniel ordered, but it was too late. Don't you ever tell me to shut up again, she yelled back. I'm sick of your manipulations, sick of you using me to hurt my mother. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in years, Sarah had stood up for what she believed was right, instead of blindly following her husband's orders. Daniel looked at her with a coldness that chilled my blood. If you choose your mother over me, Sarah, this relationship is over." Sarah stood motionless for a moment, processing the ultimatum. Then, to my surprise, she straightened up and looked him directly in the eye. "Then it's over," she said, in a voice I had never heard from her before. Daniel was stunned, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. For years he had controlled every one of Sarah's decisions, every thought, every move. And now, for the first time, she had told him no. "You're not serious," he muttered, with a nervous smile. "You're pregnant, Sarah. You can't raise a child alone." "I won't be alone," Sarah replied, looking at me for the first time in months with something that resembled love. "I have my mother." But I wasn't ready to forgive so easily. The months of humiliation, the nights spent crying, the feeling of having lost my only daughter. All of that couldn't be erased with a few words. "Sarah," I said softly, "I appreciate that you've finally opened your eyes, but this doesn't fix everything that happened." Her face fell. "Mom, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Daniel, seeing he was losing control of the situation, changed his tune. Suddenly he was on his knees in front of me with an expression of regret I knew was fake. "Mrs. Helen, you're right. It was all my fault. I convinced Sarah that you couldn't take care of yourself. I pressured her into making difficult decisions. Please forgive me." I looked down at him, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. It was pathetic to see him grovel after months of arrogance. "You're asking for forgiveness now, Daniel, when you've discovered I'm not the poor, helpless old woman you thought I was. I was terribly mistaken," he continued with an act I knew all too well. "Let me make it up to you. We can be a happy family." "A happy family," I repeated, "like when you threatened to have me declared incompetent. That was a mistake. Like when you called me a manipulative old woman 5 minutes ago." Daniel swallowed hard, realizing that every word he had said was being used against him. I was upset. I didn't know what I was saying. "No," I said firmly. "You knew exactly what you were saying. You were showing your true colors for the first time." I turned to Sarah, who was watching the scene with an expression of shame and pain. "And you, Sarah, for months you treated me like a burden. Do you think one apology erases all that?" "No," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I know I can't erase what I did, but I can try to make it right." "How?" Sarah looked at Daniel, who was still kneeling on the floor with a pleading expression. Then she looked at me. "By leaving him," she said finally. "By leaving this man who convinced me to betray the only person who ever loved me unconditionally." Daniel shot up. "You can't be serious. You're carrying my child." "A child I don't want growing up watching his father manipulate and mistreat his grandmother," Sarah replied with a determination that filled me with pride despite everything. "Sarah, you're making the biggest mistake of your life," Daniel threatened. "The biggest mistake of my life was marrying you," she retorted. Daniel looked at both of us with pure hatred. "This isn't over. I'm going to fight for custody of my child. I'll prove you're both insane." "With what money are you going to fight?" I asked calmly. "Because tomorrow I'm speaking with your boss." "Did you know I have enough shares in your company to influence personnel decisions?" Daniel's face went completely white. "You wouldn't dare." "After everything you did to me, of course I would dare." "That's an abuse of power," he muttered. "Like when you abused my motherly love to manipulate me. Like when you abused Sarah's trust to turn her against me." Daniel headed for the door, but stopped before leaving. "This doesn't end here," he said, his voice full of venom. "I'm going to destroy you both." "Try it," I replied unfazed. "But do it from somewhere else, because you have exactly 1 hour to get your things out of my building." 1 hour. You said we had 30 days. That was when Sarah was with you. Now that she's alone, there's no reason for you to continue living on my property." Daniel slammed the door on his way out, rattling the whole house. Sarah and I were left alone for the first time in months, surrounded by a heavy silence and documents that proved a reality that was still hard to process. "Mom," Sarah murmured after a long time, "can you ever forgive me?" I looked at her. This 30-year-old woman who had just discovered she'd been living a lie, who had betrayed her mother for a worthless man who was pregnant and alone. "I don't know, Sarah," I answered honestly. "You hurt me very deeply." "I know," she whispered, "and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. Starting with what? Starting by giving you back your mother's jewelry," she said, pulling out the small bag she had taken days ago, "and by asking you if I can stay here tonight. I have nowhere else to go." I looked at the bag with my mother's jewelry. Then I looked at my pregnant, lonely daughter, and I felt my heart soften just a little. "One night," I said finally. "But tomorrow we start talking about how you're going to earn back my trust." Sarah nodded, tears of gratitude streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll make things right." But I knew promises were easy to make and hard to keep. The real test would come in the following days. The next few days were strange and tense. Sarah stayed in her old room, which I had kept exactly the same since she got married. During the day, we moved around the house like two polite strangers, only talking about necessary things. Breakfast, the weather, her morning sickness. But I was watching every gesture, every word, every attempt by Sarah to win back my trust. And what I saw surprised me. For the first time in years, my daughter was doing things for herself without waiting for someone else to solve them for her. She washed her dishes immediately after eating, kept her room spotless, and even started helping with housework without me asking. On the third day, as I was watering my violets by the window, Sarah approached with a cup of tea in her hands. "Mom, can we talk?" I nodded without turning to look at her. I was learning that silence was more powerful than 1,000 words. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days." She began, sitting in the chair where Daniel used to install himself like a king, "about everything that happened, about the things I did and said." I continued watering my plants, waiting. "I've realized it wasn't just Daniel who changed me. I allowed him to change me. I chose to believe him instead of trusting my own heart." I finally turned to look at her. She had deep, dark circles under her eyes and looked thinner despite the pregnancy. It was clear she hadn't been sleeping well. "And why do you think that happened?" I asked. Sarah sighed deeply. "Because it was easier to blame you than to face the fact that I had married the wrong man." That honesty took me by surprise. I expected excuses, justifications, but not such a raw admission. "When Daniel started complaining that you visited too often, I knew deep down he was being unfair. But it was easier to think you were being clingy than to accept he was selfish." She placed her hands on her belly where the pregnancy was barely showing. "When he started suggesting you move into a home, I knew it was wrong, but he convinced me it was for your own good. And I wanted to believe him because it meant I didn't have to face the real problem." "What was the real problem?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "That I had married a man who didn't respect my family, who didn't respect me, and who was never going to change." In the following days, Sarah began to tell me things that made my blood run cold. How Daniel had gradually isolated her from her friends, convincing her they were a bad influence. How he controlled every dollar she spent, telling her women didn't know how to handle money. How he had convinced her to quit her job because real wives are dedicated to the home. "And you never thought to talk to me about this?" I asked one afternoon. "Daniel told me you wouldn't understand, that you were from a different generation. He convinced me that if I told you our problems, you would tell me to leave him. And he didn't want outside interference in our marriage." Each revelation hurt more than the last. My daughter had been suffering in silence while I thought she was happy. And when she had finally tried to reach out to me, it was too late because Daniel had programmed her to see me as the enemy. A week after Daniel left, Sarah received a call that left her pale as a sheet. "It's the building manager," she said in a trembling voice. "Daniel is in the lobby. He says he has the right to come up because he's still my husband. And what did you tell him? That I didn't want to see him, but he won't leave. He's yelling that he's going to call the police. That this is kidnapping." I rose from my chair with a surprising calm. "Tell the manager I'm coming down. I'll talk to him." "Mom, no, he's very agitated. We don't know what he's capable of." "That's exactly why I have to go down." When I got to the lobby, I found Daniel in a rage, yelling at the poor manager who was trembling behind his desk. "That crazy old woman has my wife held hostage," Daniel was shouting. "I want you to call the police right now." "Good afternoon, Daniel," I said in a serene voice. He whipped around to face me, his eyes bloodshot. He had obviously been drinking. "You give me back my wife right now." "Sarah is exactly where she wants to be," I replied. "And if you don't leave my property immediately, I will be the one to call the police." "This isn't your property. You're a liar." I took out my phone and dialed my lawyer's number, putting it on speaker. "Victoria," I said when she answered. "This is Helen. I have an agitated man here who refuses to leave my building. Could you please confirm for him that I am the legal owner?" "Of course, Mrs. Helen," my lawyer's clear voice replied. "You are the sole owner of the building located at—" Daniel was speechless as he listened to the legal confirmation. The manager looked at him with a mix of fear and embarrassment, finally understanding the situation. "Anything else you need?" clarified Daniel, I asked after hanging up. "This isn't over," he muttered, but he no longer sounded convincing. "You're right," I agreed, "because tomorrow I'll be talking to your supervisor at the company, and the day after that with the bank that gave you the loan for your car. Contacts are useful when you have enough money." Daniel left without another word, but I knew he would be back. Men like him don't give up easily. 2 months later, the court date arrived like a storm we had been waiting for. Daniel had followed through on his threat and sued us for parental alienation and financial manipulation, demanding full custody of the baby Sarah was carrying. That morning, as I was dressing in my best black suit, Sarah came into my room with tears in her eyes. "Mom, I'm scared," she confessed. "What if the judge believes him? What if he takes my baby away from me?" I hugged her for the first time in months, feeling her body tremble against mine. "That's not going to happen," I assured her. "We have the truth on our side." When we arrived at the courthouse, Daniel was already there with a lawyer who had clearly cost him more than he could afford. He looked at me with that familiar hatred, but this time it didn't intimidate me. I had something he would never have, the peace of mind of someone who knows they're on the right side. Sarah and I sat at our table. She wore a purple dress that highlighted her 5-month pregnancy, and I wore the earrings my husband had given me for our anniversary. We were ready. Daniel's lawyer began his argument painting me as a vengeful woman who had used her money to destroy a happy marriage. He spoke of manipulation, emotional blackmail, and a toxic mother-in-law who couldn't accept that her daughter had grown up. When it was our turn, my lawyer Victoria rose gracefully and began to present the evidence. The text messages where Daniel insulted Sarah, the recordings where he threatened to leave her if she didn't kick me out of my own house, the testimonies from neighbors who had heard his yelling and abuse. But the decisive moment came when the judge looked up and stared at me. "Mrs. Helen Mendoza?" he asked with disbelief. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, confused by his reaction. The judge took off his glasses and studied me carefully. "Did you work at the family court about 30 years ago?" My heart stopped. "Yes, Your Honor. I was Judge Gonzalez's secretary." "You helped me when I was an intern. You taught me how to organize case files. You brought me coffee when I worked late. You were always kind to me when everyone else treated me like I was invisible." The entire courtroom fell silent. Sarah looked at me with astonishment. Daniel turned pale, and I felt as if the world had stood still. "Your Honor, I'm Ricardo Morales," the judge continued. "Do you remember me?" And then I saw him. Beneath the gray hair, the wrinkles, and the authority was the shy young man who had worked in my office decades ago. The boy I had defended when other lawyers made fun of him. The one I had encouraged when he doubted his abilities. "Ricardo," I murmured, feeling my eyes well up with tears. "Of course I remember you." The judge smiled, and for a moment he was that insecure young man seeking approval again. "I never forgot your kindness, Mrs. Helen. You told me I would be a great judge one day when I didn't even believe it myself." Daniel and his lawyer exchanged panicked glances. They knew they had lost before they even started. "Your Honor," Daniel's lawyer intervened, "I believe this constitutes a conflict of interest." "There is no conflict," Judge Morales replied firmly. "There is only justice, and after reviewing all the evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Daniel Herrera has been the only manipulator in this story. The verdict was decisive. Daniel lost all rights to the baby and was issued a restraining order forbidding him from approaching Sarah or me. Furthermore, he had to pay all court costs and compensation for emotional damages. When we left the courthouse, Sarah hugged me like she hadn't since she was a child. "Mom, how is it possible that the judge knew you?" "Life comes full circle, honey," I replied. "And kindness always comes back when you least expect it." And 6 months later, when my granddaughter Hope was born, I understood that it had all been worth it. Sarah had found herself again becoming the loving mother I always knew she could be. One afternoon, as we were rocking the baby in the garden of our home, Sarah asked me a question I had been waiting for. "Mom, have you truly forgiven me?" I looked at her. This woman who had grown so much in such a short time, who had learned to value what was truly important. "I forgive you, Sarah," I said finally. "But more importantly, you've learned to forgive yourself." That night, as I made tea in my old chipped mug, I thought of my husband and his letter. I had used the power he left me exactly as he had hoped, not to hurt, but to protect and to teach. Sarah had learned that true love isn't based on control, but on respect, and I had learned that it's never too late to stand up for your dignity. Looking out the window at the garden where my granddaughter played, I smiled. Some battles are worth fighting, and some victories taste sweeter when they are long in coming. In the end, I didn't need to shout to be heard. I just needed to remember who I really was, and defend it with the quiet confidence of someone who knows she is on the right side of history. 5 years after the trial, my life had taken a turn I never imagined. Little Hope, now a 4-year-old girl with her mother's bright eyes and my own stubborn streak, was running through the garden chasing butterflies while Sarah and I prepared Sunday lunch. "Grandma Helen, look what I found!" Hope shouted, running towards me with a yellow flower in her tiny hands. "It's beautiful, my love," I said, lifting her up for a kiss. "Shall we put it in the vase with the others?" Sarah smiled at me from the kitchen. In these years, she had blossomed in an extraordinary way. She had gone back to school and now worked as an accountant for a small but prosperous company. And above all, she had regained that spontaneous laugh I remembered from her childhood. "Mom, a letter came for you," she said, handing me an elegant envelope. It was from the foundation I had established 2 years ago with part of my husband's inheritance. Home and Dignity had become a refuge for older women suffering from family abuse or neglect. What had started as a way to honor my own experience had transformed into something much bigger. "What does it say?" Sarah asked, drying her hands on her apron. "They're inviting us to the inauguration of the third house," I replied, feeling that deep satisfaction that only comes from knowing your pain served a greater good. "They're going to house 15 more women." In these years, we had helped more than 50 women rebuild their lives. Some arrived as I had been stripped of their dignity by ungrateful children or abusive relatives. Others came alone without family, but with similar stories of neglect and mistreatment. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Sarah went to answer it and returned with a mysterious smile. "Mom, you have a visitor." Behind her appeared Judge Ricardo Morales, now retired, accompanied by an elegant woman with silver hair. "Mrs. Helen." He greeted me with that warm smile he still had from his youth. "I want to introduce you to my wife, Elena." "It's an honor to meet you," Elena said, taking my hands. "Ricardo has told me so much about you. He says you were one of the most important people in his professional development." "He exaggerates," I replied, but I was deeply moved. "Not at all," Ricardo insisted. "And that's why we wanted to invite you personally. The Association of Retired Judges is going to give you an award for your work with the foundation." "That's not necessary," I began to say. "Yes, it is," he interrupted me. "Your story inspired many of us to reflect on real justice, the kind that goes beyond written laws." After they left, Sarah and I sat on the terrace while Hope played with her dolls. The garden was more beautiful than ever. I had hired a gardener, but I still personally cared for the violets my husband loved so much. "You know what I admire most about you, Mom?" Sarah asked suddenly. "What?" "That you never became bitter. After everything I put you through, after all the pain, you never let it harden your heart." "Of course I became bitter," I admitted. "There were nights when resentment ate me up inside, but your father taught me something very valuable in his letter." "What did he teach you?" "That true power doesn't come from revenge, but from the ability to transform pain into something useful for others." Sarah nodded, understanding. She herself had experienced that transformation. She now volunteered at the foundation, using her own experience to advise young women who had fallen into toxic relationships. "Did you ever find out what happened to Daniel?" she asked. "My lawyer Victoria told me he moved to another city. It seems he got married again." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I hope he learned something from all of this, but honestly, it's no longer my concern." "Aren't you curious?" "No," I answered honestly. "I learned that some people only come into your life to teach you lessons. Once you learn the lesson, you can let them go." Hope came running up her cheeks, rosy from playing. "Grandma, can you tell me the story of the brave grandmother?" It was her favorite story, a child-friendly version of what had happened. In my version, the grandmother discovered she had magic powers and used them to protect her family from the evil dragon. Again. I feigned complaint, but I was already lifting her onto my lap. "Yes, and don't forget the part where the good judge helps her." As I told the story for the umpteenth time, I thought about how strange fate was. I had needed to lose everything to discover what I truly had. I had had to hit rock bottom to find my true strength. "And they lived happily ever after?" Hope asked when I finished. "Happily ever after. The brave grandmother found her happy ending," I concluded. "Did you find your happy ending, Grandma?" I looked around, at Sarah setting the table for dinner, at the flourishing garden, at the beautiful granddaughter in my arms, at the letter from the foundation promising to help more women. "Yes, my love," I replied. "I found it." That night, after putting Hope to bed, I sat in my favorite chair with a cup of tea and the letters that arrived weekly from the women we had helped. A 75-year-old woman thanked me for giving her the courage to confront her abusive son. A 60-year-old woman told me she had gotten her house back after her grandchildren tried to scam her. Each letter was a confirmation that my experience had served something greater than my own pain. Sarah sat next to me with her own cup of tea. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" "About your father," I admitted. "About how proud he would be of what we've built." "I'm sure he's watching us," Sarah murmured. "And about you," I continued. "About how proud I am of the woman you've become." "I learned from the best," she replied, taking my hand. We sat in silence, enjoying the quiet of the night. In the distance, we could hear the gentle hum of the city, but here in our garden, peace reigned. "I love you, Mom," Sarah whispered. "And I love you, honey," I replied. "I have always loved you, even in the darkest moments." And it was true. A mother's love transcends wounds, disappointments, betrayals. It is stronger than pride, more enduring than resentment, more powerful than any fortune. That night, I slept soundly, without nightmares, without worries. I had found something worth more than all the money in the world, the peace of knowing I had used my second chance wisely. In the end, it wasn't about how much money I had or how much power I had wielded. It was about transforming my pain into purpose, my humiliation into strength, and my experience into wisdom for others. I had learned the most important lesson of all, that it's never too late to defend yourself. It's never too late to change your story, and it's never too late to find your true worth.